There is a very specific, catastrophic kind of mistake that arrogant people make when they assume silence equates to weakness, a monumental miscalculation that cost a certain group of suburban tyrants exactly $47,000, their pristine reputations, and ultimately, their freedom. They genuinely believed they were sinking their teeth into an easy target, a confused, vulnerable 84-year-old Vietnam War veteran who would simply fold under the pressure of escalating fines and legal threats, surrendering his beloved home just to make the nightmare stop. What these meticulously manicured predators failed to realize, in their blind greed and blinding hubris, was that by backing my grandfather into a corner, they had inadvertently declared full-blown, scorched-earth warfare on his granddaughter, a 33-year-old digital forensics analyst who spent her entire adult life hunting down ghosts in the machine for defense contractors, tracking the invisible digital footprints of international syndicates for a living. Every single illicit wire transfer, every fraudulently backdated document, and every quietly installed piece of malicious code leaves a glowing, irrefutable trail in the dark if you know exactly where to shine the light. And these people had absolutely no idea the magnitude of the storm they had just invited into their front yards. My name is Samantha Sam Reynolds, and before this uniquely American domestic thriller completely hijacked my reality, I earnestly believed that the most pressing threats to my family's safety were abstract, faceless entities lurking on the dark web, not the overly tanned, aggressively pleasant neighborhood watchdogs living just 3 streets over in Alpharetta, Georgia. Life had been dealing me an incredibly heavy, unrelenting hand lately, culminating in a blindsiding divorce that left me feeling utterly adrift, both financially and emotionally gutted, prompting a quiet retreat back to my childhood sanctuary. Moving back into the spare bedroom of my grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, was supposed to be a fleeting harbor in the middle of a raging hurricane, a quiet space to breathe and reconstruct my shattered life, while sharing morning coffees with the only unwavering, steadfast pillar of love I had ever truly known. For nearly 45 years, Arthur had been the beating heart of Oakwood Terrace, anchoring a community that existed long before the zip code became a wealthy, highly coveted status symbol, back when it was just a quiet grid of modest, hard-working families who actually knew each other's names, shared tools over chain-link fences, and sat on porches as the summer sun dipped below the Georgia pines. His property sat on a gorgeous, sprawling corner lot, but the undeniable crown jewel of his existence was the breathtaking, meticulously cultivated garden taking up the entirety of the backyard, a living, breathing testament to his patience and enduring love. We are talking about heirloom tomatoes so impossibly heavy and sweet, they practically bruised if you looked at them wrong, rows of vibrant bell peppers, climbing beans that reached for the sky, and an aromatic herb patch that could rival any high-end culinary supplier, all coaxed from the earth by the magic embedded in my grandfather's soil-stained, calloused hands. Every single morning, right at the crack of dawn, you could hear the familiar, comforting crunch of his heavy work boots navigating the gravel paths, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand as he surveyed his verdant kingdom, a daily ritual that brought him a profound, quiet peace. This garden was never merely a hobby for him. It was a deeply sacred sanctuary, a living bridge to my late grandmother, Martha, who had knelt in that exact same dirt alongside him to plant their very first seeds the week they bought the house, their shared dreams taking root in the fertile southern soil. But right around the tail end of 2021, the very soul and fabric of Oakwood Terrace began to mutate, infected by a sudden influx of aggressive new money that gleefully bulldozed the charming, mid-century homes to make way for sterile, imposing, slate-gray monstrosities that lacked any semblance of character. The driveway landscape shifted from reliable, well-loved sedans and work trucks to an endless parade of gleaming, oversized luxury SUVs that had never encountered a single speck of actual dirt, and riding the crest of this gentrifying wave was Victoria Sterling. Victoria was a high-octane, ruthlessly ambitious luxury property broker who moved through the world with the terrifying, unblinking zeal of a cult leader, preaching the gospel of protecting our investments to anyone who would listen. Hovering somewhere in her mid-50s, she boasted icy blonde extensions that probably cost more than my first car, a wardrobe consisting entirely of sharp, aggressive power suits, and a synthetic, unnerving smile that didn't quite reach her calculating predator's eyes. She bought the most obnoxious, towering new build on Sycamore Lane and instantly mobilized, holding impromptu, heavily catered wine and cheese mixers on her flawlessly chemical-treated lawn, subtly planting the seeds of paranoia among the newer residents, whispering that the older, unrenovated homes were a spreading blight that threatened their precious property values. It took less than 8 months for her toxic whisper campaign to culminate in the disastrous creation of the Oakwood Terrace Community Association, an entity born in the shadows of deceit during the unprecedented, paralyzing ice storm of early 2022. The election to ratify the association was a breathtaking masterclass in voter suppression and strategic disenfranchisement, intentionally scheduled on a Tuesday evening when the roads were literal sheets of black ice, guaranteeing that the older, legacy residents, the ones who would undoubtedly vote against giving a stranger power over their homes, were physically trapped indoors, unable to safely drive to the community center. Miraculously, the vote passed by a razor-thin margin, and with the strike of a gavel, Victoria Sterling anointed herself president, wrapping her manicured fingers around the throat of the neighborhood, instantly granted the horrifying, unchecked authority to fine, harass, and financially bleed out anyone who dared to exist outside her sterilized, country club vision of suburban life. The very first warning shot she fired across our bow was aimed directly at my grandfather's heart, his garden. A heavy, aggressively official envelope stamped with a gold foil crest arrived in the mail, coldly declaring that his beloved, 4-decade-old vegetable patch was an unapproved, visually offensive agricultural nuisance that violently violated the newly drafted landscaping bylaws, slapping a dizzying, immediate penalty of $600 onto his record. I remember the exact, metallic taste of pure, unadulterated adrenaline flooding my mouth when I read that letter, watching my grandfather's shoulders slump as he stared at the paper, the sheer cruelty of penalizing a man for growing food on land he had owned since the Carter administration making my blood boil. But Victoria was just warming up, because the follow-up letter that arrived merely 10 days later was an act of such profound, targeted malice it literally took my breath away, demanding the immediate, total demolition of the cedar access ramp my grandfather had painstakingly built for himself 2 years prior after a debilitating hip replacement. They had the absolute audacity to label a necessary medical accommodation an unauthorized architectural eyesore that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the street, completely disregarding the undeniable fact that the ramp was a beautiful, sturdy piece of craftsmanship, born from weeks of Arthur's stubbornly refusing help, measuring and sawing every single plank himself in the sweltering garage because his independence was the one thing he refused to surrender. Seeing the tremor in his weathered hands as he held that second notice, hearing the quiet, utterly defeated crack in his voice when he whispered that maybe he was just getting too old, maybe he didn't belong in this world anymore, ignited a quiet, terrifyingly cold fire deep within my chest. This wasn't about maintaining curb appeal, and it certainly wasn't about uniform mailbox colors. This was a highly calculated, ruthlessly efficient campaign of psychological and financial elder displacement, specifically engineered to terrorize legacy homeowners until they broke, forcing them to sell their properties for pennies on the dollar just to escape the relentless harassment. Their next target was my grandfather's absolute pride and joy, a beautifully maintained, vintage 1968 Chevrolet C10 pickup truck, a gorgeous, sky-blue relic of a bygone era that had hauled firewood for neighbors, pulled floats in the local 4th of July parade, and acted as the beating, mechanical heart of his youth. Victoria herself, armed with the latest iPhone, physically trespassed onto the edge of our driveway, circling the classic truck like a vulture, snapping dozens of photos, weaponizing them on the neighborhood social media app with venomous captions begging the community to rally against this rusting, commercial monstrosity that was single-handedly dragging their home values into the gutter, hitting my grandfather with a recurring $300 daily fine until the vehicle was permanently removed from sight. While Victoria was incredibly busy basking in the glow of her digital echo chamber, whipping the newer, easily manipulated residents into a frothing, elitist frenzy over the mere existence of a classic truck, I was quietly descending into the digital catacombs, executing the kind of deep-dive background reconnaissance that military contractors pay top dollar for. The creation of a homeowners association is bound by incredibly strict, highly specific legal frameworks dictated by Georgia real estate law. And when I pulled the public articles of incorporation and ran a forensic analysis on the voting registry from that fateful, icy Tuesday night, the entire facade instantly crumbled, revealing a staggering, breathtaking foundation of absolute fraud. The law mandated a strict 51% physical or legally verified proxy quorum to establish the governing body, but the physical attendance that night barely scraped 35%. The gap had been magically, conveniently filled by a massive influx of electronic proxy votes allegedly submitted by seasonal snowbird residents who were supposedly wintering in Florida. The metadata attached to those digital signatures, however, was as loud and incriminating as a blaring siren, clearly showing that every single one of those crucial, tie-breaking proxy forms was generated, signed, and submitted from the exact same IP address, routing through a local commercial server physically located in a high-end coffee shop just 2 miles down the road, incredibly. Completely time-stamped a full 48 hours after the meeting had already supposedly adjourned. When I formally contested this anomaly with a heavily documented, bulletproof legal filing sent to the state regulatory board, the retaliation from Victoria was almost instantaneous, a wild, flailing escalation that crossed the line from petty neighborhood tyranny into blatant, aggressive financial crime. A fresh invoice arrived, backdated nearly 3 years, claiming my grandfather owed a mandatory, multi-thousand-dollar initiation fee that he had supposedly agreed to pay in installments, complete with a perfectly rendered, digitally time-stamped signature bearing Arthur's name on the bottom of a contract he hadn't even known existed, let alone signed. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, his brow furrowed in deep, heartbreaking confusion, quietly swearing to me that he didn't even know how to set up a digital signature, that he still walked into the physical bank lobby to deposit his meager pension checks. And that was the exact, horrifying moment the icy dread truly set in. This was no longer just a case of a power-tripping suburban housewife printing fake invoices. Someone with highly sophisticated technical knowledge had stolen my grandfather's digital identity, and the rabbit hole of their criminality was infinitely deeper and far more sinister than a simple turf war over a vegetable garden. The harassment shifted tactics, morphing into a series of highly orchestrated, weaponized safety inspections, beginning with a phantom, anonymous complaint regarding the structural integrity of my grandfather's roof, followed immediately by the arrival of a slick, fast-talking contractor from a company called Sterling Property Evaluations. I physically blocked the man from setting up his ladder on our property, demanding his state licensing credentials, watching with intense, grim satisfaction as he stammered, sweated through his expensive polo shirt, and eventually scurried back to his oversized truck when I loudly informed him, while on speakerphone with the state licensing board, that performing and bonded inspections in Georgia was a criminal offense. When the roof scam spectacularly imploded, they pivoted flawlessly to environmental terrorism, sending terrifying notices claiming our compost bin was a breeding ground for vermin, attaching highly pixelated, heavily cropped images of rats that I traced back to a stock photography website in less than 30 seconds with a simple reverse image search. The sheer, overwhelming scale of this psychological warfare was nearly blinding until our first real ally stepped out of the shadows. Dorothy Higgins, a sharp-witted, fiercely observant 76-year-old retired university librarian who lived 4 houses down, arriving at our front door, clutching a monstrously thick, meticulously color-coded binder. She had been quietly, obsessively tracking every single citation, fine, and threat leveled against the elderly population of Oakwood Terrace, revealing a horrifying, perfectly systemic pattern of abuse targeting seniors who live completely alone, lack tech-savvy children to advocate for them, and possessed significant equity in their homes. But the most terrifying revelation hidden within Dorothy's exhaustive notes was the common denominator linking every single victim. Just weeks before the barrage of fines began, each elderly resident had received a charming, seemingly innocent visit from a highly helpful, civic-minded young man offering free, courtesy technical support to help them navigate the new association's online payment portals, and secure their aging laptops against hackers. My blood ran completely cold as my grandfather, his eyes widening with painful recognition, confirmed that just a few months prior to my arrival, a very polite, well-dressed young man named Preston Sterling, Victoria's 26-year-old son, who aggressively marketed himself as an elite tech concierge, had spent 2 hours at our kitchen table optimizing my grandfather's computer. I locked myself in the home office, plunging directly into the registry files and deeply buried directories of the old desktop, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I uncovered the digital rot this predator had left behind. A beautifully engineered, flawlessly disguised Trojan horse malware suite, operating silently in the background, harvesting every single keystroke, logging into his banking portals, capturing his passwords, and specifically generating the forged digital signatures they were using to authorize the fraudulent backdated withdrawals. This sociopathic mother-son duo had built a perfectly closed-loop, predatory ecosystem, where the son quietly installed the keyloggers to siphon their life savings and forge the legal documents, while the mother relentlessly hammered them with bogus fines from the association, squeezing these terrified, isolated seniors from both ends until they were financially devastated and forced to sell their homes at rock-bottom prices directly to Sterling Holdings LLC, a shell company owned entirely by Victoria. Taking down a syndicate this deeply entrenched and brazenly corrupt required a weapon much sharper than a simple police report. It required a perfectly synchronized, multidisciplinary annihilation, which meant I needed to assemble a team of professionals who understood exactly how to dismantle a financial empire brick by stolen brick. I immediately reached out to Detective Marcus Vance, an old contact now working heavily within the Fulton County Economic Crimes Division, who took one look at the staggering mountain of digital evidence, the IP logs, and the undeniable financial paper trails connecting the shell companies, and practically leaped out of his chair at the prospect of finally nailing the ringleaders of a multi-county elder fraud franchise. To handle the legal onslaught, we brought in Elias Thorne, a terrifyingly brilliant civil rights litigator who specialized in complex RICO violations, who grinned like a shark smelling blood in the water when he realized we could legally classify the Homeowners Association as a corrupt organization, allowing us to pursue massive, triple damages and immediate asset forfeiture. To ensure these predators could never hide in the shadows again, we enlisted Chloe Carmichael, a relentless, award-winning investigative reporter for WGCL-TV Atlanta, who began quietly staging her camera crews and lining up victim interviews, preparing to detonate the story on the evening news the exact second the handcuffs clicked shut. Sensing the tightening noose, or perhaps just driven mad by their own unchecked greed, Victoria and Preston made their final, incredibly desperate moves, convening a secret, illegal emergency board meeting to vote on the immediate, forced foreclosure of my grandfather's home, citing completely fabricated, catastrophic electrical hazards that rendered the property uninhabitable. The sheer, chilling audacity of this claim was explained hours later in the dead of night, when my newly installed, covert infrared security cameras captured Preston Sterling himself, clad in a dark hoodie, creeping up to our exterior utility box and physically sabotaging the main breaker panel, intentionally creating the exact, highly dangerous electrical arc they planned to use as their legal justification to seize the house the following morning. Knowing they were preparing to strike, we executed a brilliant, tactical retreat, temporarily moving my deeply reluctant but trusting grandfather into a beautiful, secure assisted living suite across town, allowing Victoria to smugly believe she had completely routed us, while Elias quietly filed a mountain of sealed federal injunctions, completely freezing every single bank account, real estate asset, and luxury vehicle connected to the Sterling name. The air crackled with a dizzying, intoxicating electricity on the evening of the grand community meeting, where a triumphant Victoria, wearing a crimson silk blouse that screamed unearned victory, stood before a packed room of exhausted neighbors, preparing to proudly announce the successful acquisition of my grandfather's property and present her glorious, modernized vision for the neighborhood. She was barely 3 sentences into her self-congratulatory speech, her artificial smile beaming under the fluorescent lights, when the heavy double doors of the community hall violently swung open, sucking the air out of the room as I walked down the center aisle, closely flanked by Detective Vance and 4 heavily armed federal agents, completely trailed by Chloe Carmichael's blindingly bright television camera crew. The look of absolute, soul-crushing terror that washed over Victoria's face as the feds physically blocked the exits, cutting off Preston's pathetic, frantic sprint toward the side door, is an image that will be permanently, gleefully etched into my memory for the rest of my natural life. I calmly walked right up to the projector, unplugged her sanitized presentation, and mirrored my own tablet to the massive screen, forcing the entire, gasping room to bear witness to the raw, undeniable truth. The keylogger codes, the shell company bank transfers, the desperate audio recordings of seniors pleading for mercy, and the crystal-clear, high-definition night vision footage of her son trying to burn an old man's house down. Victoria's screams of conspiracy and defiance devolved into hysterical, ugly sobbing as the cold steel cuffs were ratcheted tightly around her wrists, her meticulously crafted illusion of power shattering into a million pieces on live television, while the room erupted into a deafening, unified roar of applause when Detective Vance announced that over $500,000 in stolen funds had already been seized and would be returned to the victims. 6 months later, Oakwood Terrace had completely transformed, not through forced aesthetic compliance, but through the deep, unbreakable bonds forged in the fires of collective trauma and righteous survival. Victoria and Preston were both sentenced to 5 years in federal lockup with complete restitution. The corrupt association was legally dissolved by a state judge, and my grandfather's garden, now larger and more vibrant than ever, became the undisputed, beating heart of a community that finally remembered how to care for one another. We took the settlement money and founded Arthur's Vanguard, a sprawling nonprofit organization that travels across the state, outfitting the homes of elderly citizens with military-grade digital security and teaching them how to spot the smiling, well-dressed wolves waiting at their doors. The nightmare had finally ended, replaced by the sweet, enduring scent of blooming jasmine and the sound of children running through the sprinklers, but it leaves behind a haunting, deeply unsettling question about the nature of modern society. If the very institutions and local organizations designed to protect our neighborhoods and maintain our peace can be so easily weaponized by the greedy and the corrupt, how do we ever truly know if the smiling neighbor across the street is a friend offering a helping hand, or a predator patiently waiting to steal everything we've built?
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.